Okay, now we're going to start with the actual unit training outline itself, the T&EO, Training and Evaluation Outline. This will be spending most of your time in developing this product. This is a metric that actually analyzes your training, how you become proficient in each one of the different METs that you've just developed. The T&EO document is the Army source for conditions and standards of collective tasks. Remember, collective tasks used to evaluate proficiency. The T&EOs are developed, the T&EOs are developed by the approved proponent. The Army proponent develops the one for each unit. The T&EOs are composed of major procedures, steps, and actions a unit must accomplish to train to standard. And T&EOs also provide the evaluation with an outline of tasks, steps, and measures, and other evaluation criteria for evaluating tasks to standard. Finally, they provide planners resourcing guidance for developing events and collective tasks themselves. Okay, the T&EO evaluation matrix looks like this. Basically, it's a guide when planning and preparing training events to set conditions of achieving a task of proficiency at a specified level. Event planners must meet a T&EO criteria to include planning and dynamic, complex training environment. This is a training environment spelled out by the T&EO, the PMESII standards we just came up with, and usually using at least 4 of those operational variables, and using a hybrid threat, which is basically, what's a hybrid threat again? A combination of regular and irregular forces using, obviously, terrorism and operations like that have to be included to make the operation realistic. Next would be night or day training. To achieve a fully trained exercise, you have to train at night, usually in a live fire environment. Live fire is one of your culminating exercises, provides your evaluation. It has to be externally evaluated to be fully trained. Remember, when we are going from a practice to a trained event, we have to make sure that it is evaluated by an external or higher headquarters. And finally, fully trained itself. In a fully trained environment with an external evaluation and fully trained. If any of these resource requirements are not planned, prepared, or executed during the training event, the unit will not meet the criteria for T proficiency assessment, regardless of how well they execute the performance steps and measures. External evaluations required for task proficiency of a T or better. Evaluations outside the evaluated unit's chain of command, and commanders 2 levels up direct the resources. How do we use the T&EO to evaluate task proficiency? Units use performance steps and measures to evaluate the performance of collective tasks. Each applicable numbered task is evaluated during the execution of this task with a graded go or no-go. Unit leader performance measures also evaluate the leader proficiency, which is part of the T&EO. Steps and measures may be also identified as critical steps and measures shown with a plus sign, or a leader step and measure, which is shown with an asterisk. Once the task evaluations are complete, the critical and leader step tasks will have further implications on the overall task assessment as defined in the training evaluation matrix. Okay, you take that evaluation matrix that the unit evaluator performs, and actually he or she tallies that up, and actually it's evaluated along with the evaluation matrix outline. In this case, you have to have a percentage of performance of goes at 91% or higher.
Nope, outside.
They all must be.
It's not in here. It's probably
critical performance test. They all must be rated as a go,
next to the
and the
bikes.
leader performance measures must be at 90% also.
Well, I don't know.
So the percent of performance measures must be at 90%. They all must be a go, and the percentage of leader performance measures also must be 90% to achieve a full training evaluation. And again, in order to move from a practice to a trained assessment, this is very important when you're doing your training calendar. When you're moving from a practice to a trained assessment, external cumulative event must be successfully executed. Gunnery, convoy, live fire exercise, or an FTX external evaluation as a culminating exercise to move from a T, basically from a P to a T. Now it has to be identified, usually it has to be identified on the training calendar itself. This is what the Army has called an objective calling using Six Sigma. We're just going to go over this. We're not going to go in very detail, but if you want to know how the Army evaluates training as a whole at a unit level, they use a metric called the T-level percentage. And what they do is take they give a multiple to the number of METs that you're using, a multiple of 3. They use also multiples of 3 points for T, for a T minus, 2 points for P, and 1 point for 1. So in this case, they came up with a total of 10, a factor of 10 for the actual T and P and U proficiencies. And then they go down and take the METs, the number of METs you did with 5 times the multiple of 3, it comes up to 15. 15 divided by 12, or 12 divided by 15 comes up to 80%.
Hey, Mr. Hackett, real quick, we talked about this slide. We weren't going to do this one because yeah,
that's right. Okay, yeah. You're right.
This one's confusing. So guys, don't worry about the T level.
That's right. We're not going to really use this slide. Okay, you're right. Sorry. Okay, how do we assess MET proficiency? The commanders assess current MET proficiency using a T, P, or U metric. They also use inspection results, AARs, and train records from DTMS, as we have just gone into. They use personal experience and observations. And they use a bottom-up feedback from subordinates that we discussed a little while ago. The commanders prioritize the METs. The METs, again, come from the essential tasks in the higher or the brigade order. And they usually prioritize these based on subjective analysis. They take a snapshot of the unit's readiness at the point of time. They all start at a practice minus current assessment. Then they determine what their level of proficiency is going to be at the end state. They want usually a realistic estimate of the unit's ability to achieve based on resources and time available. Some may not be trained at the end of the culminating exercise. And that is why sometimes they use, we'll go into it's a long-range training program, they use up to a 2-year training program, knowing that some of these METs may take longer to attain. You want to have realistic training, and the realistic training will impact on the abilities of the unit to achieve its MET efficiency. Commanders must determine the training event, again, by using an XVAL in order to attain the projected level of proficiency. And these were examples of training, culminating training events to attain that proficiency. This is an example of MET training versus the training events. Okay, the METs are the fundamental element that ties what a unit trains, the capabilities and missions, to the assessment of the unit training readiness. Standards for company and higher units. In units without training, they trade to standards from the higher unit order, and also units without a standardized medal must develop one. Standardized medals are available on ATN, CATS, and DTMS, as just went into. This is an example of a mission train. These are these mission essential tasks we just went through. And these are an example of training events to attain those mission essential tasks. This is what you're going to be doing in the next exercise. When you're going to the training calendar, you'll be identifying all the training events that you must consider in developing a unit training plan. That's your individual, your collective, and your mid-range tasks, which will go into the battle tasks. Okay, a long-range training calendar. The long-range planning horizon is provided in the higher headquarters command training guides, typically the form of a calendar to provide subordinate commanders adequate time to properly train and resource training. The horizon represents the time allocated for the unit to achieve and sustain training proficiency. Having a clear understanding of the time the unit has to train is essential to developing successful training. This can be found in FM 7.0 in paragraph 2-25, but in FM 7.0 is going to be a fundamental regulation for unit training plans. Training within the time limits of planning horizon drives when the unit or individual is expected to be proficient in the training task. And this slide also shows a planning horizon for the units with a coordinating staff. The horizon corresponds to the integrating cells within that headquarters: current operations cell, future planning cell, and the planning cell. The long range planning horizon usually covers the unit's overarching training plan over an extended period of time, typically years. It synchronizes supporting units and agencies so that a unit can properly execute training events. It is graphically depicted on a unit training calendar, which we'll get into. For the example of an active component division, a long-range planning horizon is 2 years. For a reserve component division, it's usually 5 years. Mid-range. The mid-range planning calendar further defines the long-range planning calendar, but defines it in terms of generally T-6 out to T-13. The short-range planning horizon defines specific actions planned prior to the start of the training. Generally extends out 0 to 6 weeks. Again, where does the commander list any significant training risks? In the op order issued, usually in the situation paragraph, under risk, training risk, challenges, and resources. And what are examples of training readiness issues? These can be personal turnover, because your time available, and equipment availability and serviceability. Why do we use a training plan horizon? Usually projective training events and progressive training events, and identify, coordinate resource requirements to visualize the training unit's end state and beyond the long-range planning. And beyond by long-range planning. And plan, crawl, walk, and run methodology. Again, we're talking about the long-range planning and unit training plan, developing mid-range planning into your crawl, walk, and run training, which is culminated in usually a live exercise, an FTX or a live fire exercise, which actually attains the proficiency in the T or fully trained task. Identifying resources. Your resources are your personnel turnover, new equipment fielding, time available, and training distractors. And identify unique or scarce resources. And these are training areas, facilities, and ranges that are difficult to secure. These have to be identified well in advance because you're always competing for these areas. Classes of supply, especially class 3 and 5, availability based on funding. Again, that's why it has to be forecasted ahead of time, because you're competing for funds available. TADs, your training aids, may be in high demand. Key personnel and supporter training, your OP4 players and your measles. Your OP4 players are usually being torn between 2 or 3 different training events. and you have to plan for their time, obviously, and resourcing not readily available at home station. The T&EOs provide additional detail regarding resource requirements to specified specific collective tasks. Okay, identifying training risk. This is another area we're going to get into in the training, in preparing the training calendar. Your training risk, any training risk that a commander has to identify that puts a plan at risk because of key resources required to train are not available, insufficient time to train, and readiness level required. Risk management, the process of identifying, assessing, and controlling risk arising for operational factors and making decisions that balance risk cost with the mission benefits. And in training, it is mental process used by the commanders to identify and mitigate safety risk. Okay, why is a mission? Use a backbrief. A backbrief is important discussing dialogues because you have to have dialogue between you and the higher level commander. What you're doing is the dialogue in the backbrief is agreeing. The commanders agree on the scope and projections of the training. The critical points of the training calendar, commanders dialogue are mission analysis backbrief, the training briefings, the training meetings, the quarterly training bulletins, and yearly training bulletins, and before, during, and after external evaluations. The big picture. All together now, we're going to put this thing together. We have the capabilities, what you've gone through in the first exercise. You identify what the functions and capabilities of each unit and headquarters were. You came up with the MTO. You looked in and came up with the MTO and how your unit is designed, generally by mission, people, and equipment. You use the metal. We went into the next exercise. We just went into the CATS and ATN and found that the range of tasks your unit could perform. The training guidance from higher headquarters. We're going to go into that in more detail in MDMP when you get your training up. When you get the op order, your training guidance specifies what the unit will train and begins with begins the training management process. Unit training. Recognize that units can't fully train every task. Prioritize based on mission, resource, and time. Okay, your training guidance. The annual training guidance establishes your mission and starts the mission analysis. You determine your METs to train from the training guidance, and you prioritize those METs. And you come up with significant training events that can be realistically achieved to perform that mission essential task. You conduct MDMP. You analyze the higher headquarters mission statement, the higher headquarters training and leader development guidance, the expected operational environment, making it realistic training based on the PME, SSII, and political, economic, and military structure. The expected operational environment, planning horizon. The planning horizon, the time period allotted to train the mission requirements, and again, required as readiness assessment. End state. And finally, the quarterly training bulletin, which is draft and published training guidance itself. Okay, the next practical exercise we're going to do is we're going to organize into the same groups. We're going to come up with every training task, including collective tasks and individual tasks that a unit might train on, and for each one of the units. Again, these can be found in ATN, in CATS, and also in 350-1.
Yep. So for this one, it's just going to look like a long list of every possible training highlight or anything that you guys have to do. Individually, I mean, you guys can do it as a group. That's how we normally do it. But just take 5 minutes. We'll meet back here. I'll say at 11:15. And then each group is going to go ahead and brief, like just by brief, I mean, like just run down your list. And then the other groups just cross off what they've already said, just so we aren't getting repetitive answers throughout. So you guys can go ahead and start that.